Good evening, everybody. Well, it's time for our midweek lesson. We're still in 1 Corinthians. Tonight we'll be reviewing and looking at Chapter 7. Chapter 7 deals with marriage and single life. The objectives in studying this chapter is to be impressed with the basic principles governing marriage and the single life. Also, to see the importance of studying Scripture in its proper context. And to summarize this chapter, at this point in Paul's letter, he begins to address those things which the Corinthians had written to him. In this chapter, he discusses the matters relating to marriage and the single life. The first half of the chapter deals with issues involved with those who are married, verses 1 through 24. And the last half of the chapter covers those who are single, verses 25 through 40. It's important to notice that some of what Paul says is in light of the present distress being experienced by the Corinthians. Also, that much of what he says is clearly identified as his personal judgment, not necessarily the commandments of the Lord. In such cases, it's not a matter of right versus wrong, but good versus better. So we'll go on to the outline of the chapter, and it starts off with instructions concerning those who are married. And just in general, it is good to marry to avoid sexual immorality. That's verses 1 and 2. Proper attitudes to govern the marriage relationship. That's verses 3 and 4. Abstinence appropriate for short times devoted to fasting and prayer. And living a single life with self-control is a gift from God. So unmarried and widows should marry if they cannot exercise self-control. And that's verses 7 through 9. Now, in regards to divorce, this is verses 10 through 16. As commanded by the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband. If she does, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled. And also in verse 11, a husband is not to divorce his wife. And as instructed by Paul in verses 12 through 16, Christians are not to divorce their unbelieving spouses because of the sanctifying influence the believer can have on the family. If the unbeliever departs, the believer is not under bondage. Let the unbeliever depart. The instructions given in the view of the possibility of the believer becoming able to save the unbelieving spouse. So just because you're married to an unbeliever, that's no reason for divorce. In fact, it's a better chance of them being saved remaining married to a believer. Okay, the principles governing Paul's instructions, and this is 17 through 24. Paul said, "As the Lord has called each one, so let him walk." The example of circumcision versus uncircumcision, where keeping of the commandments of God is what is important, and that's verses 18 through 20. The example of being a slave versus being free, where one might improve their condition of it if it is possible and profitable, and that's verses 19 through 24. Now, the next section he goes on to concerning those who are single. That's 25 through 40. For those who are virgins, Paul gives his personal judgment in the light of the present distress. Remain as you are. Of course, if you are married, remain so. But those who are single would be spared much trouble in the flesh in light of what is to come. Remaining unmarried enables them to serve the Lord without distraction and to be totally devoted to Him. But if it is necessary, the single may marry. And next, the choice is not between good and bad, but the choice is between good and better. And that's 37 and 38. Now, concerning those who are widows, they are free to marry, but only in the Lord. That's verse 39. Though Paul's personal judgment is that one will be happier to remain single, which is also the advice, though not demanded, of the Spirit of God. And that's verse 40. So, let's look at the questions and answers for this chapter. Beginning with, it's question number 1, which is list the main points of this chapter. Instructions concerning those who are married, the first 24 verses, and instructions concerning those who are single, 25 through 40. What are Paul's instructions to married Christians? Render affection that is due to one another. Do not deprive one another except for short periods of fasting and prayer. And do not leave or divorce your spouse. What does he advise to those who are unmarried and widows? It is better that they remain as they are, but if they marry, that is all right. Question number 4. What does he tell Christians married to unbelievers? This is 12 through 16. If the unbelievers are willing to live with them, do not divorce them. But if the unbelievers depart, the Christians are not under any bondage. Let the unbelievers go. And question number 5. What underlying principle is governing Paul's instructions in this chapter? And this is verses 17 through 24. The underlying principle is for people to remain in whatever position they find themselves when they are called by God. Though there is change is possible and profitable, such is permitted. So it's in the best interest. Okay, question number 6. What advantage do the single have over the marriage? And this is verses 32 through 35. They are better able to serve the Lord without distraction. And what restriction does Paul place on widows who desire to remarry? This is verse 39. The restriction is that they are to marry, but only in the Lord. And if you remember right, it tells you in the Bible that you should not be unequally yoked. So, in this case with the widows, if they married somebody who was not in the Lord, that would actually be becoming unequally yoked. Now, it might be profitable for the unbeliever, but it would not be profitable for the widow. That's chapter 7. I appreciate your listening and going through this with me. We'll next week we'll go through chapter 8 and then go on finishing the book of 1 Corinthians. This is really this study is a practical study and how to live your lives as Christians and how to make decisions when faced with challenges or things that come up in your lives, and using Scripture and the Bible to help make those decisions. So thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.